أعوذ بالله العلي العظيم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. Let's let people in. Admit all. Admit all. Admit all. Joining. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. See who else shows up. Give him a minute. Here's Jeff. Joining. Okay. All right, folks, here we are. Second to last part of our treatise of the Simorgh's Shrill Cry. I leave off in the part 2. All right. Left off on parts just at the beginning of the section 1 on part 2 of a Simorgh's Shrill Cry. So let's get this done. Then we'll launch into the question time. Okay. Part 2 on aims, section 1 on annihilation. The aforementioned sakina is such that if one wants to depart from oneself, one cannot easily do so. However, one can develop to the point that one can leave one's physical form whenever one wants and go to the world of divine majesty where one's ascent reaches the highest horizons. And this one can do whenever one wants. Then, whenever one looks at one's essence, one delights because one sees the light of God radiating upon oneself. This stage, however, is still incomplete. When one goes still further, one passes beyond even this stage. One becomes such that one does not think of one's own essence, and one's consciousness of self is obliterated. This is called the major annihilation. When one forgets oneself and forgetting, it is called annihilation in annihilation. As long as one delights in one's cognitive ability, one is still deficient, which deficiency is reckoned to be part of crypto-polytheism. One reaches perfection only when cognition is lost in the object of cognition. For whoever delights in the act of cognition as well as in the object of cognition has, as it were, two objects. One is abstracted when one leaves behind the cognition for object of cognition. When the last traces of corporeal humanity are expended, it is the state of obliteration, the stage of the words, every creature which liveth on the earth is subject to decay, but the glorious and honorable countenance of thy Lord shall remain forever. One of the masters says that to say that there's no God but God is the tawheed of the masses, while to say there's no God but he is the tawheed of the elite. He has, however, been careless in his classification, for there are 5 grades of tawheed. First, there's no God but God. The tawheed of the masses denies Godhood to that which is other than God. Such people are the commonest of the common. Beyond this group is another group who, by comparison with the first, are elite, although they are still common in comparison with another group whose stage is higher than that of the common. Their tawheed is there is no God but he, which is more sublime than the first. This group stage is higher because the first group denies Godhood to other than God, whereas the second group does not stop at denying that which is other than God is not God, but denies all objective identity in relation to the identity of God and says that he-ness or ipseity belongs to him. Ui is the word that Suhrawardi uses here, which is not gendered in Persian. No one else can be called he or it, since all he-ness or ui are from him, or from from it in Persian. Hence, absolute he-ness or ui is his. Beyond them is another group whose tawheed is to say there's no you but you. This is more sublime than saying he for God. He refers to a third person, and these people deny all you-nesses, in that by expressing the second person, one affirms one's own existence. They refer, of course, to the presence of God. Yet another group is still higher. They say that when someone is addressed as you, that someone has been separated from the self-identity of the speaker, and thus duality has been posited. Now, duality is a long way from the world of oneness. These people have lost themselves or consider themselves lost in the phenomena of God. They say there's no I but I. Those masterfully all say that you-ness, I-ness, and he-ness are all terms superfluous to the self-subsistent essence. They have submerged all three locutions in the sea of obliteration. They have destroyed expressions and eradicated references, and everything shall perish except himself. These people's stage is the loftiest. So long as men mention a connection with the realm of humanity, they cannot reach the realm of divinity. Higher than that, which there is no stage, for it has no end. A great mystic was asked, "What is Sufism?" He replied, "Its beginning is God, and its end is infinite." Section 2, on the proposition that the more cognizant one is, the more perfect one is. Now, here's the problem with this translation of the word cognizant, which is, you can use it loosely. The word used by Suhrawardi here is arif. Fasl dovom dar anke har ke arif tar bud, kamil tar bud. Who is more cognizing, sure, but arif is form 3 of arafa, to know, that is to noeticize. So whoever has more gnosis knows more, is what Suhrawardi is actually saying. The prophetic locution is well known. God never adopted an ignorant person as a friend. The Lord of the great law, despite his perfection, was commanded to increase his knowledge, as God ordered him to say, "Love increases me in knowledge." One of his blessed sayings is, "May the day not dawn in which knowledge is not increased." If the apostles' condition was thus, then what must others' condition be? It is not necessary that such knowledge, which befalls to Noah by way of revelation, concern divorce, business, taxation, or transaction, for such is exoteric knowledge. It should deal with the unveiling of the conditions of self-subsistence, divine might, and lordship, and one should know the arrangement of the existential order, the angelic realm, and the occult mysteries of heaven and earth, as it is said, "Say he revealed it, who knoweth the secrets in heaven and earth." And to know the secrets of destiny is to divulge, which is unlawful, as the prophetic word forbidding, which states, "Destiny is God's secret, so divulge it not." The people of reality are in accord that to reveal the secret of destiny is infidelity. Furthermore, not everything encompassed by the mystic's knowledge is expressed by them, so that everyone may commence with the ideal that the beauty of the might of oneness is too great to be entered upon by everyone, or the goal of every seeker. Few of my servants are thankful. In the nature of humanity, with its multiple bodily limbs, there's no more than one locus that is worthy of the divine horizon. We found not there in more than one house of those who surrender it. Therefore, since the affair is based on but one individual's constitution, and that all of the many faculties, limbs, and compounds of the human body, not more than one is prepared for advancement, then one must take an analogy with the condition of one edifice. Therefore, words are better veiled. These lines are by me. In a corner of the ruins are many men who read mysteries from the tablet of existence. Aside from the apples and oranges of the wheel of fortune, they know amazing things and drive donkeys. An insightful man must constantly search for novelties and realities and be content with that amount that is in proportion to his mind. We let this user in. Hussein ibn Mansur Hallaj said, affection between two persons become fast when no secret remains unrevealed between them. Therefore, when affection reaches perfection, the mysteries of the hidden and the cryptic things of creation are no longer hidden. Since the absolute perfection of man means for him to resemble God, and since knowledge of perfection is one of God's attributes, then ignorance is a deficiency in man. It follows of necessity, therefore, that the more cognizant of realities one is, the nobler one's existence is, for ignorance is always ignominious. Section 3. On positioning man's delight in and affection for God. The sect of dialectical theologians and the masses of those learned in the jurisprudential principle hold that it is not proper for man to love God, because love is an expression for the inclination of the soul to its own species, and God is above being homogeneous with creation. Rather, affection should consist of man's obedience to God. The people of cognition, on the other hand, uphold both man's affection for and his delight in God, to which, in their opinion, homogeneity is not relevant, since man cannot love a color or a shape without being of the same species. Affection for God has nothing to do with the animal faculties, but rather with the locus of divinity, which is the center of God's mysteries in man. This affection has to do with intuitive experience. Affection is for, in essence, to delight in imagining the presence of another essence in which speciality plays no part. Love is a word for affection that has exceeded its bounds, but love and yearning do not endure when the desired object has been attained. Therefore, every yearner has of necessity attained something and not attained something. For if he had attained everything of the beloved's beauty, he would have no further desire. If he had not attained or perceived anything at all, then his desire would have not been aroused. Therefore, every yearner has both attained and not attained something. There's deficiency in yearning because it entails non-attainment. As for the discourse affirming delight, delight is an expression for the perfect attainment of a thing and also for knowing that one has attained it. If something is attained and the attainer is not aware of it, it is not perfection. When the eye attains something perfectly, which is vision of pleasant things, it comprehends and takes delight. The sense of audition also takes delight in perceiving pleasant sounds. The olfactory sense perceives pleasant smells, and so also all the senses. The rational soul attains perfection in the cognition of God and in knowing realities. When the soul attains that, its highest perfection is in perceiving the dawning of God's lights. It takes shape through the perfection of divine might, so that its delight is even greater because its perception is nobler. The noblest perceiver is the human soul, and God is the greatest of those things that can be known. Therefore, human delight is the most perfect and vastest. However, an impotent is unaware of the delights of coitus, even though he may hear that men greatly enjoy it. Well, has the old man said, he who tastes not knows not. These words are in proof of delight and affection. In the time of Junaid, it is told of the Sufis that Ghulam, Khalil, and a group of theologians and legalists slandered the brethren of abstraction and issued a legal verdict that they were heretics and infidels. This they established through witnesses and documents. Junaid remained uninvolved throughout the proceedings. The Prince of Hearts, Abu Hussein Nuri, Katani, and Zakak, along with a group of great mystics, were summoned to appear for sentencing. It has been reliably reported that when the executioner was able to carry out the death verdict, Abu Hussein Nuri rushed to the first to die, asked why. He said, "I wanted to give to my brothers that one moment of life left to me." These words were reported to the caliph, and it was sufficient to cause their release. Prior to that, Dhul Nun Misri had also been maligned, and God had delivered them. Concluding section. A divisible thing cannot properly know by cognition that which is indivisible. for then the act of cognition too would be divisible. And if the act is divisible, then it follows that the thing known must also be divisible. Hossein Ibn Mansur Hallaj said, the Sufi does not accept anything and is not accepted by anything. He cannot be dissected or divided. At the very time he was being crucified, he said, the aim of the ecstatic is that the one reduce him to total oneness. Those who wish to tear down the spider's web must expel 19 pincers from themselves. Of these, 5 are visible flyers and 5 are concealed. 2 are swift walkers that are obvious in their movements, and 7 go so slowly that the motions are invisible. It is difficult to get all these flyers away from oneself because whenever one wants to fly, the flyers go ahead and prevent one's motion. Of all the flyers, the concealed ones are the most difficult to repel. There's also an island in the midst where there are people with slender legs. Whenever men advance, they suddenly stick out their legs and wrap them around their necks to keep them from moving lest they reach the water of life. I have heard that if one boards Noah's ark and takes Moses' staffs, he will be delivered. And that was the end of the Simorgh Shrill cry, Safire Simorgh. And we are left basically with the tale of the Occidental exile in this, which we will start the week after next. Now the stage is all yours. Whatever you want to talk about regarding this treatise. Don't be shy.
Can you hear me, CD?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So, my first comment or question, it is page 102, where it is discussed what is the definition of love according to theologians and what is its definition according to the Sufis. Here, my point that it is not proper to say that God loves something because love is the inclination of the soul, and it is not proper to say for God that he has inclination of the soul. And the reverse, it does not make sense to say that a person loves God because love is an expression, how was it said? Inclination of the soul to its own species.
Which
And
is
God
a
is
which is a
not.
very common theological Kalami position on God. That Suhrawardi beautifully refutes, not just here, but in several different places. They say that it is impossible to love God because there is no likeness between a human and God, right? So the sentiment of love, according to these theologians, is a category error. Suhrawardi says this is nonsense. There is no basis to say that the sentiment of love is only applicable between species of a kind. If it were otherwise, then the question is, then why is it that animals can love humans and humans can love animals, although certain people would dispute that this is the case? Or why is it that we can love a scenery and become enamored with that scenery in a state, yet that scenery and all the various elements in it is not our kind. They're not humans. That's the mountains, etc., etc. They would come back with saying, well, maybe that is not love, that awe and love are not the same thing. But that's, then kind of getting into a very artificial semantic argument, which makes no sense on many different levels. But according to Suhrawardi, it is possible for the lower to love the higher. So that the sentiment of love is not bound necessarily to species of kind, right? And part of this is because with Suhrawardi, love is the state of yearning. And without this, there is no pulling up of the soul beyond its confines. Okay? And everything that lives, everything that is animate in existence has this, and this is the pull to its source. Okay? And as far as he's concerned, this includes the animals, this includes the insects, the microbes, the rocks, the minerals, everything has this. Everything is imbued with this sentiment of love and yearning. And this is what draws it up back to its source. And what animates it, it is what makes it alive. That is in some ways we could say that we can equate this with the very life force itself. So if you don't love, you don't live, basically. It's another way to put it. Yeah.
Okay, now I see his point that this love or the yearning, it is the thing which drives the lower to the stage of the higher. Because initially, when I read this passage, I thought that the easier answer than the present would be okay, no problem. You love only that which has resemblance to you, which is similar to you or the same kind, but it is not problem to say that we and God are the same kind in the sense that our souls are blown from the, let's say, the God essence. So that makes the basis for the resemblance.
Well, here's the fallacy that Suhrawardi is putting his finger on. Is resemblance in itself the cause of love? And as far as he's concerned, no. And you could demonstrate this in real life as well. That do we need to does something need to resemble us in order for us to have affection for it? No. And what does that resemblance even entail? What are the components of that resemblance? Does it have to be identical, to us in order for us to love it? So that does that mean that only in the recognition of complete similarity is the generation of love even possible? That is a fallacy. How's that? Because if it wasn't a fallacy, then all the various examples that we have of human affection for very abstract things, right? Or even human affection for concrete things that have no resemblance to humanness would not be possible. So the theological point of view on love and resemblance is a fallacy because number one, its very definition of resemblance is flawed. And also its definition of identity is completely, primitive. So they can't get their heads around this properly. The reason they say this is because with the theologians, their overriding concern is that God can only be feared because it is the ultimate authority. But the Quran itself refutes them because it says, they love God and God loves them. The word hope is used very explicitly in the Quran. So that there refutes them. So the issue of resemblance that these theologians insist on very consistently, that you cannot love something that isn't similar to you or doesn't resemble you, right there is thrown out of the water. So it is possible for then the lower to love the higher, and also conversely for the higher to love the lower. So that relationship does in fact exist, and so love in itself, hope, ish, rekba, etc., is not necessarily bound by the rank, stage, or station that a given entity or existence occurs in. It's not bound by that.
Okay. Uh, as, basically, the theologian's argument fails both on level of literal reading of Quran and
Mm.
also fails on logical level.
Yep, yep, completely. Never mind the
Uh,
noetic level of the matter. That it's just completely, yeah.
okay. So My next question is here a little bit further, the same page. Since man can no, excuse me. It is the next page. The next page in the first paragraph, when it is beautifully put that how to say, if you have not attained absolutely anything from the object of love, the love would not exist at all.
Mm.
If you have fully attained the object of your love, because the desire of this object is already fully attained, again desire will disappear. So it is in between, that is the motor which makes the motion to yearn as to strive to the object of love, which applies that the love of God, because God is infinite, we can never fully attain Him. This is which makes our love for God infinite in some sense. But here
This
I
is
will.
well, this is the reasoning, this is the basic reasoning of the theologians that, how can you love something that is not objectified, right? How can you focus on an object that isn't an object, right? This is the question that the theologians ask, even though the Quran says God loves them and they love God. But how is this even possible? Well, he's saying here's why, here's how it is possible. There's other layers underneath that, but um, in the tariqas of Iran, I don't know what they do in amongst the Turks or the Arabs or the North Africans, but I think in India it's pretty similar. One of the things, then this will be denounced as shirk by most Orthodox people, but one of the things that a sheikh will tell you in the very initial stages of your development is that if you cannot concentrate properly on the dhikr, right, then he instructs you to visualize an object that you love. This could be a family member, this could be a spouse, this could be a pet, right? I've even heard, prescriptions, someone loves their cat more than anybody else. Okay, when you're meditating, visualize your cat, okay? Because that object of love is the theophany of love, right? So if that object of love helps you to concentrate and to center yourself in the practice of the dhikr, there is no blame in visualizing it. We're not saying that that object is the totality of God. We're saying that object is a manifestation of the self-disclosure of God. So visualize your pet, visualize your lover, visualize your parent. The optimum is for one to visualize the teacher itself, right? But if you can't do that, then visualize whatever occurs to you as that object of love until you attain that station of total fana fil peer or shaykh, whatever, that you have total love for the teacher. Then when you start visualizing the teacher in your mind during your practice, then this fusion, this identity becomes ever more realized. But even in the absence of that, you are more than welcome to visualize anything else, any other object of your love, any other object of your yearning. And if during that you have the realization to then visualize objects above that, so that the initial object of your love transforms into something higher than it, then do that. Keep going. So these practices that we're going to read about in the or these liturgies that we're going to read about in the Waradat al-Taqdid that I've just gave to you, this starts to explain an actual mechanics of a praxis of dhikr, how it works, right? And the active imagination is very central here to how you perform this, but to understand that the object-subject relationship in these sorts of practices are completely relative. This is one thing that Suhrawardi is trying to tell us here by trying to collapse this boundary between subject and object more and more and more, so that then we get to that presential knowledge, that ilm huduri, that is the basis of his epistemology, right? Because once you understand this presential knowledge, once there is that ittihad, that union of the knower, the knowledge, and the thing known, then this is the point where then the elevation begins, right? Where he says in our prayer, in his prayers, pray to your father, to pray to his father, to, et cetera, et cetera. This is what it's talking about, because once that occurs, you elevate. And for each stage of union in dhikr, there's a higher stage. It doesn't end. Because these higher stages are theophanies. They're tajalliyat, right? Which is why Ibn Arabi is so good in this respect, because he's very unequivocal that there's no such thing as a single fana experience or baga experience. Every fana, and there are infinite versions of this, because the names and attributes are constantly self-disclosing, and every modality of their self-disclosure is different from one to the next. So for the Gnostic, there are infinite stages of fana and baga, from one stage to another, and each one is pulling you up in a spiral. Sometimes it doesn't appear that you're going up. Sometimes it feels like you're going down, but actually you're traveling to spiral up more and more and more. So this is what this means.
Okay. So the subtle point being that every love, because it in its essence it is divine love, as you are saying, even if it is for a cat or for a stone, as previously
Sure.
you mentioned about the
Just an example
calendar.
that Rumi gives in the Masnavi. Yeah. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
has potential to grow infinitely. It is
Yes.
just, are we trying to grow this love, or we are stuck without any progress?
The whole point of the entire point of the exercise is to expand the love, and the object is irrelevant, because if the whole of the universe is the self-disclosure of God, then every object is a temporary signpost to either elevate you or keep you veiled. And that decision is entirely up to you. Whether you want to remain veiled by that object or allow it to elevate you to something higher. It has two faces. So that is the goal, is to expand, not to remain stationary, right? This is where then I think a lot of the exoteric religious people have got it completely backwards and wrong, because a religious dogma and doctrine is not supposed to keep you stationary. It's not supposed to straitjacket you. The whole point of the exercise is to bring you close to the source as much as possible. Arguably, this is also the raison d'être, the reason for the source revealing itself in that message to begin with, to bring you closer to it, not to keep you distance from it, right? So this also reveals why these theologians and the exoteric approach to religion makes no sense. It's like almost anti-spiritual in almost every conceivable way, even when it sometimes says certain things and other things, but the way that it is designed itself is to prevent people from breaching these boundaries, to actually, elevate to the source.
Okay, and just oh, uh, the next one here in the sentence, the noblest perceiver is the human soul,
Mm.
and God is the greatest of those things done can be known. So implying that, how to say, the greatest pleasure uh, could be achieved by the person, because the person is the noblest of all things who are capable to perceive, and the object of perception is God, which is the greatest and most beautiful, which burns in us the greatest feeling of joy and delight and awe and so on. But here the point is, one of the other treatises where the Sheikh says, actually the greatest perceiver is God himself.
Yes.
So the greatest enjoyment is not in we perceiving God, but God Himself perceiving Himself. That is so. What would be the interplay between these two?
Without getting into that, because Suhrawardi, I think whether deliberate, but because of his method and the symbology that he's using, he avoids the kind of panentheistic language that we find in Ibn Arabi, right? But the outcome, from a sort of a roundabout sort of way, the outcome is sort of the same. I said, I think it was last time or the time before, that Suhrawardi is a dualist that ends up at quasi-monism, and Ibn Arabi is a monist that ends up at a kind of quasi-dualism. And with Suhrawardi, we got to be a little bit, we got to read him very closely to see what his intention is, because where all of this ends, right, on the practical level, is what the Hermetics talk about, union with the holy guardian angel or the perfect nature, the Tibat Tam, as Suhrawardi calls it, the doppelganger, the paredros, right, which is both the parent of the soul or the parent of the perceiver, as well as created by this perceiver simultaneously. There's a kind of a symbiotic relationship. There's a dual creative. One is creating the other simultaneously, which doesn't make any sense, but it does from a higher standpoint. So that thing, at least in Suhrawardi's metaphysics, is a individuated form of the angel of humanity, which is Gabriel, or the active intellect. And what is the active intellect? It is the luminosity, or one of the sparks of the light of lights itself, at the lowest part of the emanation of the lights. So in essence, we have the best of both worlds. We have this dualism in the sense of, that man is not God, in the sense that, say, some of the Sufis sometimes say it very unequivocally, but at the same time, it is, right? If these various lights, these various intellects, as Corban puts it, he calls it the God angels, right? That each of these various hypostases of the lights that are angels, etc., are angel gods. But yet ultimately all of them derive their light, their very existence, from the light of lights. And this light is a single light. It's not a multiple light. So if this light is a single light, then all the cascading emanations of the lights and reflections from it are also the singular rays of it simultaneously. So by using the language of Hermeticism and Zoroastrianism as well, where Suhrawardi ends up in his argument is that ultimately, all of these various hypostases and angels, etc., are all the light of lights. They're not, and they are. It's just they in their angelophany, in that theophany, which is an angelophany, appearance of the angel, they are individuated forms that are occupying different levels of a hierarchy of lights. But ultimately, it is the same light. It is the light of lights itself in that particular epiphany.
And so the Arabic word one intiqash, by imprinting this image or this theophany in us, we also become part of this whole
Well, I mean,
scheme.
we already are, in a sense, because as far as he's concerned, the whole of existence is light. Light and being for Suhrawardi are synonymous. Sometimes a lot of people don't see this. Light and being are the same thing as far as Suhrawardi is concerned. So we're already in that, except our luminosity is so low, right, that it is as if that our bodies, that just is a sort of fortress of darkness, even though that darkness itself is kind of a coagulation of these lights that have emanated down, right? So then what does that say that that temporary coagulation of light into a form of darkness itself requires to elevate itself back into its presence, to decoagulate itself back into its luminous origin, if you would. And that occurs through, the active knowledge of one's holy guardian angel, the perfect nature, who is really the light, the spark of the infinite light, that is one's individuation, as the active intellect, and the active intellect obviously is itself then part of the greater constellation of the other archangelic intellects, the Ughul al-Fa'ala.
And if you allow me, last question. I think somewhere it was in the previous treatises, maybe Munisul Ushak, that
Yeah.
the sentence was leave empty melancholy. So here, what is the difference when he used the word nostalgia with this positive one compared to the melancholia?
It's the same word. The two um there's two words that Suhrawardi usually uses in Persian. One is andu, which also means depression and can also mean nostalgia, and shot, which means both yearning and nostalgia simultaneous. In English, there's sometimes with accents, he does a transposition between one word or the other, but basically these are the two words that Suhrawardi is basically using throughout.
Okay, thank you very much, Sidi.
Sure thing. Anyone else?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll go.
I can,
So,
can you put your mic up just a tad?
yeah, can you hear me better now?
Oh yeah, that's better.
Oh, okay. So, first point would be that it seems like in this framework too, there's a lot more flexibility with regard to other traditions, like how the object of love in Christianity is the divinized Jesus Christ. From a certain Islamic point of view, that's polytheism, it's shirk.
Yeah,
And yet at the same time within this framework, properly understood using this negative theological method, Christ, the prophet, any of the saints, the Theotokos, whatever, they are proper way stations in our devotion because they're
yeah,
forwarding our devotion to the one ultimately.
1000% correct. Yes, that's
and
exactly. Yeah,
and it seems that we now have like another paradigm with which to understand people who might otherwise just be lumped in with mushrikeen.
yeah,
It never struck me as proper to take the Quraysh as the paradigm for all polytheists. I don't think the Quraysh were dealing with like Advaita, Vedanta, and things like that. They were
yeah.
on a completely different level.
Well, I mean, we know for a fact that they also had the pagans of Mecca, also had a problem with the Christians and the Jews before the rise of Islam.
Right,
Uh, Islam and Muhammad became a special threat to them because here they had now a monotheism that arose from right within their very hearts.
right,
That was the first thing. The other thing is that, when you look at these Qurayshi elites, I don't think these people really believed in anything. They're a lot like our elite contemporaries today. They were making a
right,
profit from situating Mecca as a major caravan route where people housed their own deities and then they're being taxed for doing so.
right.
Or if they entered in and out of Mecca, they were also, there were tariffs, certain tariffs being extracted. So this was a very lucrative business for these Qurayshis. And for someone to come and say La ilaha illallah, that kind of demolishes all of that, you know.
Right. It seems to me like they were, as you said, they really believed in nothing. They had elevated commerce in their own, essentially their own nafs or nufus
Yeah,
into their gods.
yeah.
their material benefit. It was the most crass materialism with no metaphysical vision behind it whatsoever.
Just like today.
Right.
With a lot-
Exactly so. And even within the garb of Orthodox Islam, you can still find this opportunistic mentality about religion.
100. I mean, we see this with the rulers of Saudi Arabia and a lot of these Gulf sheikhs. I mean, take the Saudis, what they've turned Mecca into, with these
Right.
lavish hotel clock tower hotels that look like a scene out of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, yeah, it dominates over the haram, and it's really kind of disconcerting.
Extremely. So, I mean, you can be a exoteric monotheist and be the one of the worst mushrikun, you know.
Right.
Um, but I mean, in this illuminationist perspective, this is these asnam or idols or talismans, talasim, talis are extremely important objects of elevation to the one. Just like in Iamblichus and
Right.
Proclus, after Plotinus and Plato, we
We're
have this.
engaging in theurgy.
Yeah. So this is the world of Hermeticism. And I mean, Corban coined that phrase, Harmonia Abrahamica. I've coined a new one where Suhrawardi is concerned, and that is Harmonia Paganorum Abrahamica. So the harmony of the Abrahamic creeds by or with the pagan perspective. And I think you can argue this even from a historical perspective, that the Asherah worship of the ancient Israelites before the people who wrote the book of Deuteronomy prescribed it is very much in that kind of vein, because that practice of these people worshiping at trees was something that the Canaanites and Phoenicians and Assyrians and Hittites, etc., were already doing in regard to their own deities.
Right.
But this rigid monotheism at some point decides that everything, we have to reach a point of complete abstraction. We cannot talk about anything. And with Suhrawardi, this is a very important point. He believes that to denigrate what God has created, right? Even if one takes that created element as as an object of worship, is in itself shirk. So, a lot of Suhrawardi's detractors would say that he's worshiping the angels. He's worshiping these hypostases beyond. And with Suhrawardi, this is perfectly fine, because they are figments of the light of lights. They emerge. Their maker, their originator is the light of lights. So we can very much, find these objects or these entities or these beings and hypostases to be sacred and part of the greater Tawhid of the one. And there's nothing wrong with that. And to say otherwise is shirk from the point of view of Suhrawardi.
I mean, in a lot of metaphysics, angels are basically appendages of God anyways,
Yes.
right? So
Yeah.
that's why Suhrawardi would be like, yeah, I don't care if I'm worshiping angels, because
Yeah.
it's part of God, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So for him, to exclude something emanating from the one is itself a form of polytheism.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting because that opens up to my next area of focus in this reading, which was the discussion of the levels of Tawheed.
Mm.
It's pretty comprehensive. I think it's probably one of the finest articulations of negative theology that I've ever read, because he
Yeah.
negates each stage and then he negates the negation of all of the negations.
Yeah. Until it gets to the I, the universal I. Yeah.
Right. It is still very hard for me to see him as, just to back up the conversation a little bit, it's very hard for me to read Suhrawardi and get a dualist out of him, because try as he
No, he's
may
not.
to maintain some kind of distance with the ultimate transcendent, he's bringing us pretty damn near.
Yeah. Very, very near. He's bringing us extremely close through these narratives. Yeah. Especially in that
Although-
last part of it. Yeah, he is.
I need to jump in here for a sec,
Go
because
for
this
it.
is one of the
Please.
problems I have with this. Oh, sorry, Nate. Thank you. In a way, there is some dualism, though. I mean, when we talk about people who are ignorant, for example, and when we differentiate people at different levels of gnosis, um, aren't we making a separation there?
Well, it is, but the separation is not ontological. It's kind of a, ad hoc one. That separation only exists on the realm of phenomena, not noumena. The reality of the situation is what the realization shows at the end of it. So that final form of the confession of Tawhid, of the universal I, is the true ontological reality of things, even though the masses of within phenomena are completely veiled from it.
Right, right. That's a good point.
Yeah.
It might be a lot easier to experience phenomena if one were living in a cave and not,
Sure.
amongst a society full of all kinds of different people. I really appreciate what you just said. That made a lot of sense. But this is what I was talking about last week. This is my problem with this particular, and this is just my problem. So forgive me here. But there's a going from trying to marry the esoteric with the exoteric, or even if like that in itself is already a dualism. And is it possible to marry them somehow? Because in the exoteric world, we've got, especially with all this political strife going on and all the despair in the world right now, and people worrying about, oops, people worrying about a myriad of things and fighting. There's a lot of fighting going on.
Yeah.
And antagonism between, political factions, and, there's a lot of hatred,
Yeah.
we see it everywhere. You either hate this group or that group, you hate Trump or you
Yeah. Or love
love
him, or
Trump,
yeah.
or, and
Yeah.
so this is one of my things. It's hard to wrap your head around when we're mired in all this muck,
Well,
and yet,
but hold on a second. I mean, this is something that a realization that a lot of the Sufis know. Hate is love, just in a backward, in a sort of backwash cycle, right?
Yeah.
Love's contrary is not hate. This is one of the great insights. Because in order to hate, you must love something to hate something else, right? If you're
Right.
indifferent, then that's not love.
Yeah.
Because you can't be indifferent to your opponent, your political opponent, because you love something that they want to destroy. You hate them because you love something.
What about scorn?
All of it, all of these emotions.
Okay.
Exactly.
They're all
So we're
versions
getting
of the same
further and
thing.
further away from Tawhid here at the moment.
They're all versions of the same thing, right? Except one has a destructive kind of phenomenon attached to it, and the other one has a constructive phenomena attached to it. And sometimes even these lines blur as well. But that is basically the deal with love. Love has no opposite other than
Right.
indifference. Yeah, completely.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I agree with that totally. Yeah,
Yeah,
I just wanted to. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mary.
I mentioned scorn because I was thinking about indifference, like today you are not remembered, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay, yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking.
Jeff.
Um, I appreciate this conversation. We're getting a little bit away from the text, so
Not
but
really.
I'm trying to
kind of-
ground it in our everyday experience
We're
since we're not in a
excavating
cave.
elements of the test. Yeah, go for it.
Right. And speaking of the text, I wonder in the concluding section here, there's a quote from Halaj.
Yep.
And I wonder what you make of this, where he says, the Sufi does not accept anything and is not accepted by anything. He cannot be dissected or divided. Now I know what he means by he cannot be dissected or divided, because he's talking about Tawheed and annihilation in the one. But I'm still thinking about does not accept anything and is not accepted by anything. But I don't know. What do you think about that?
This is a form of practice of meditative practice that although I think there are levels beyond this, which I think the tantric tradition beautifully tells us, is that in order to detach completely, right, from this phenomenal world, which is all divisible, and in order to attain that complete existential oneness, right, you have to cease from the process of both accepting and rejecting things, because then you're engaging in the process of divisibility, right? So using the example of Allah says, "I am God," or "I am the real," they killed him for saying that, and this in its the final act of the process before the actual killing, before Hallaj's permanent enthronement within God, is to deny either divisibility or its opposite, because these all are existing in phenomena. Right. So what he's kind of indicating is to this process of division and conjunction on a rational level is part of the phenomenal world. He's trying to elevate us into the noumena, into the plane of existential unity. Right? But if you keep on dividing and discriminating and distinguishing one way or the other, you're still in the phenomenal world.
Right, which is, again, what we were just discussing a moment ago. Same idea. So he probably didn't have any real argument with his executioners then.
No, well, I mean, probably not. I mean, we don't know. I mean, there's a lot of myth around Hallaj. We don't know what the reaction
It would be
was
hard.
at the moment of
It would
death.
be
Yeah.
hard not to be mad at them.
No, of course not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay. No, thank you. Thanks a lot. I'll let somebody else go here.
No
Thank you.
worries. No worries. Same.
If we could just go back to the section that Hassan was talking about on page 102 at the very bottom.
Mhm.
So I was also focused on this idea of this argument that I think could be taken as a logical argument and also as one that's beyond logic, where he's expressing it in a kind of logical way by saying it's possible to love things of different species, and so there's nothing wrong with human beings having affection for God. I guess what struck me about that was I was looking at I don't know if this makes a difference, but the word is jins.
Mhm. Genus, yeah.
Yeah. It's maybe not that big of a deal, but when I think of that, I think of the Aristotelian categories, and I think of substance, but just the idea that we find in all these authors that we're reading, that God is beyond all categories, whether it's species or genus. Even like we say in Qaisari that God is not ultimately a substance. And so I was thinking of it from that point of view, and it seemed like possibly there's a kind of counterexample to this, which is to say, it's not that God's a different species, it's that God's not a species. There's nothing specific about God. There's nothing general about God. God's beyond all of these categories. But I think that that's just a kind of apophatic moment in this, but it just goes unspoken there.
Yes.
He's kind of just presupposing the immanence of God and the tashbih, and kind of just not speaking about the transcendence.
One thing that is, yeah, that's what you said is right, true. One thing that on that particular point about, the possibility of love between kinds and beyond kinds is that he's raising implicitly in a kind of rhetorical way, silently, the question that if love for God is not possible as the way the theologians frame it, then how can we even say that love would be possible between two of a kind, of the same genus and species, right? This is the spanner in the works of that kind of argumentation that says that you cannot love what is not of your own kind, right? So if the higher cannot be loved, how can we then posit and predicate love on the lower level on a horizontal between two of the kind as well? On what basis? What is the category that even establishes this affection? If the higher can't, then how can the lower? And so then what exists? And that argument then goes into an infinite loop and reads to, and ends up in a sort of ethical ta'til in its own right, right? And this is what these theologians were doing on all of these various concepts. They were interrogating everything, denying everything, rephrasing everything, but then ending in a loop of infinite regress, which itself is a fallacy when you get an infinite regress, at least from the point of view of the Platonic Aristotelian framework. There has to be a had at somewhere. There has to be a limit, demarcation, and definition at some point. You can explain something or one particular thing up to a point, and you have to be able to, at least even as a placeholder, indicate it. But these guys tried to do that, but except that ended up completely dismantling the whole edifice of religion in the process.
I don't think I quite get that argument that you just made in the beginning. So if one can't love the higher, then one can't love the lower. That's part of that.
Well, the question is if the love between the vertical relationship is absent, what establishes the horizontal one on an ontological level? What is the existential basis of this? Yeah. Go ahead,
It's
Mary.
kind of like a denial of reciprocity between the creator and the created, right?
100%.
That's kind of what this Kalami argument amounts to. Because, whether or not people can semantically, definitionally love the God, people can love what God does because revelation exists, miracles exist, things like this. It manifests itself. And how is that functionally any different from loving God?
Not at all. It isn't.
And what's there's a mention here of intuitive experience, and I read through Corbin's your translation of Corbin's commentary on this whole treatise, and the way that he puts it, it's just a brief kind of phrase, but to me it suggested a different way of looking at the whole question, where it's not really logical. This is like a way of expressing it, but it's really, the way he expresses it is very existential and ecstatic. This language I think he uses of exiting, that this ecstasis, that it's not really about whether or not we're the same kind. It's that almost like love itself is a means of breaking out of one's own essence.
100% correct. That's where I'm leading up to. Where Corban is kind of putting his finger on is that this argument on this other side completely irrelevant. What I'm doing is pointing out why it's irrelevant. But Corban just goes straight to the point. That once we get to that ecstasis, it goes beyond itself already. Whatever your logical categories say, But in my belief, the very logical categories of these people are incoherent and not consistent. Well, whether from the point of view of the categories or from the point of view of scripture that we can, demonstrate. So what are these people talking about?
Okay, well, that was it for that. The other question I wanted to bring up was just in the previous part on the same page, this little argument about arguing for the more cognizant one is, or the more gnosis one has, the more perfect one is. I get the argument. It's really clear, but this is a question I've had for a while, is just what does Kamal in this context mean? It keeps coming up, and I don't think it's been defined. And I know that there could be different definitions for Kamal. So I'm just wondering.
You mean beauty?
Kamal, perfection.
Kamal, perfection.
Yeah. The absolute perfection of man means for him to resemble God.
God, yeah.
So, is this meant in the sense of completion, in the sense of wholeness? Is it meant in the sense of just being the best or the most excellent?
This is a question. This is a very good question, because this, using that language of Kamal and in the way that all of these traditions use it, it can mislead, because then we have to then ask the question, well, what is perfection? Is there a form of perfection in the human world? Is there a standard by which we then assess what this perfection looks like and what its attributes are, etc.? Religions, and Islam in particular, have defined this by basically the Sunnah of Muhammad. So the Sunnah, the practice of Muhammad, represents what perfection is. To strive and perfect that praxis that is the Sunnah of Muhammad to this culture represents what perfection is, right? That's the exoteric aspect. But then other questions rise from all of this. And the answer, at least when you read people like Suhrawardi or Ibn Arabi, is that there's a great level of subjectivity to this question, right? And the perfection that you're being propelled to is one that only the subjectivity of the relationship between you and your perfect nature can actually determine what that perfection is, what that Kamal even is, such that the perfection of your perfect nature may be very different from the perfection of my perfect nature, and goes. Even though your perfect nature, my perfect nature are each individuations of the active intellect. Okay? This is the way that this question would be framed, because if we talk about perfection, on the phenomenal plane, then we have to immediately allow for difference of what that perfection is, while positing on the noumenal level that the perfection, the ultimate perfection, is the Nur al-Anwar, the Godhead, Allah, right? Which is infinite and cannot be attained, has no limit, there's no end, cannot define it as transcendent or immanent. It is both and neither. That is the Kamal, the ultimate Kamal. On its phenomenal manifestation, the question of difference absolutely has to be allowed. And this is what I think Ibn Arabi is very good at doing, especially in the Fusus al-Hikam, is that he is gently prodding, his reader into recognizing this very fact about what Kamal is from that perspective. Particularly
Yeah.
when you take the fact that the ultimate perfection is rupturing constantly into the phenomenal,
It's
even within difference. Yeah.
it's kind of like the Delphic maxim, right? Like know thyself, or
Yeah.
who knows their self knows their Lord. Like that's the compass for this question.
Yes. That is the full compass for this question. Indeed.
Yeah, this makes sense to me. It seemed that point seems to be a consequence of wujud, that wujud is this undefinable thing that you can never anticipate how it's going to manifest itself, and so wujud itself becomes it itself becomes the standard for determining ultimately what something like perfection is.
Yeah.
But I'm still
that's a really good point.
Yeah.
But I'm still wondering, like for example, in the case of the virtues, this I think a similar question comes up. What is courage? I think even the Aristotelians can't really answer this. They can define it in some certain ways. Like they can talk about it being a mean between extremes, but then you have the same problem, which is you don't really know how to identify the extremes, and so in this wujudi perspective, it comes down to wujud itself. I get that, but I'm still wondering if there's some kind of abstract definition for Kamal. Like, could we say that Kamal is just, however it shows up concretely, Kamal is completing yourself, or putting together all the different parts of yourself, or something like this?
I don't know. Could it be equated with gnosis?
Yeah, the perfect gnosis, attainable, at least in this phenomenal realm, is probably the definition of Kamal for the human. For the in its strength. So this then raises the question that every rank of its existence has a notion of its own Kamalia, or its own takmil. In the greater scheme of things, everything has its own level of completion. The higher we go on the vertical scale, the more the bar is raised as to what perfection is.
Didn't maybe I'm misremembering, but didn't Ibn Arabi connect perfection with authority, with like vice regency? So like the more
one of them,
perfect
none of the
you are.
not as an ontological definition, but as more of a soteriological one. So the soteriological definition of what the perfection of aim is the wilaya, right? But this is not the ontological definition of perfection itself in Kamal or
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. I had this question from it comes up in all of these authors, and I keep thinking I'm not seeing anyone really spell it out. So it's just a lingering question that I have.
By the way, what do you call your rooster? Have you named it Asclepius?
Asclepius.
Yeah, I love your rooster, by the way. Speaking
I was
of
wondering
love,
if
I'll think of him when I meditate.
There he is.
It's not mine. I live in the valley, and we just have a bunch of wild chickens just running around.
Okay. It's always there. It's cool. Very cool.
Really loud. Yeah.
That's cool. Very welcome. So yeah, I mean, perfection is one of those things that you have to defined in its place, and also then realize that every level higher has its own limit of perfection, which above which is another.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yep. How are you?
Sorry. I'm good. Alhamdulillah. Yeah, so I guess my question is back to something that Hassan was talking about, and something that you alluded to about how hate is almost a form of, well, it's not a form, it's almost like a perversion of love. And I can sort of
Yeah.
see how there's that dimension of yearning that's in hate. It sort of manifests as envy. We see a lot of people who are very hateful, and it's because they want something that another group has or another person has. And I was wondering, there's also this sort of among people who are very
Just wait, just wait right there. What you just put your finger on right there. So, in other words, an absence of love on the part of that subject creates that yearning for it in the manifestation of its hate. See how it shows up right there? They are envious because they lack something. Okay? And that lack is the yearning for something that is absent. And that is propelling the emotion.
I guess a lot of that lack, it's almost like a self-denial in a sense, or refusal to accept what one has, right? It's almost like a toxicity because a person is refusing. Part of me wants to say that this is a problem in not being grateful for what one does have and not starting from that. I feel like that might be a dimension to it.
That is one dimension of it. It's see, when you get really far into this stuff, and especially in the Wujudi school, things start to make more sense, so that even your hates and peeves at various points in your life start to find their own place, rather than denying these things their reality or berating yourself or any of that stuff. You begin to understand its place, right? And once you understand its place, you understand that in existence there are poles, and these poles oscillate, and these poles establish a balance. Once this is grasped, is one begins to free oneself from the determination of one or the other.
Right, yeah, because in the Quran, I think it's in the Quran, where it says that, there's a sort of anger that's almost sort of righteous anger,
Yes.
which is
Yep.
anger for the sake of Allah. And
Yep.
is that like same
Yeah.
sort of thing? It's anger for that transcendent sort
Well,
of purpose.
because the anger for Allah is also, when we take Allah as al-haq, as the real, as the truth, right? All truths are attached and emerge from that ultimate truth. So what is true is a manifestation of al-haq. And so to be angry for that, when those, and what is the definition of kafir? We got this idea that kafir and kufar means infidel, but actually the meaning of the word is to cover, right? So who are the kufar? The kufar are those who cover the truth, right? And to be angry at that phenomena is righteousness, is sidq, it's truth, is al-haq. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's encouraged. In fact, not only is it encouraged, an entire legislative praxis is enshrined in the Quran for the believer. What does it say? Al-amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy an munkar, to prescribe the good and to resist and thwart the evil that arises from that anger, right? How it's been misunderstood or taken as an opportunistic kind of a weapon by exoteric fundamentalists to bludgeon people over the head with. But in its basic meaning, this is what it means. We are absolutely justified to be angry on behalf of the truth when it is being covered up. 100%. This is fine. In fact, it's a duty. But, you know, lingering in certain emotions forever, like we see right now, people who are, you know, I mean, I have to laugh at some of these people. Like we have all these, you know, nationalists, Trumpists, etc., or hating on people they've never even met before or interacted with. Muslims are this, Muslims are that. Have they ever interacted with the Muslim? Have they ever lived in a Muslim country? Have they ever even opened a single page of the Quran? How can you hate that which you don't know? Truly.
I guess another aspect of that is sort of bludgeoning people with sort of human emotions.
Yeah.
So for instance, when Charlie Kirk died, you know,
Mm.
it's people are just like, oh, how come you're not sad enough for it? It's almost like they're using that human feeling as
Yeah.
something to bludgeon others with. And it's sort of been like it was a weapon of dehumanization in a sense by sort of showing, oh, we're so human because we feel this so strongly.
Well, actually, my sadness was for the fact that these people are even feeling sadness for his dipshit. But that's that's another conversation. But you see how all of this is propelled by a sort of yearning, and that yearning, whether it be from a lack of something, you know, whatever, but it is always that yearning is propelling even these negative emotions, or what is, you know, termed as negative.
Yes,
Yeah.
and sorry to interrupt, Reyes, but
No, go
this
ahead,
is
go ahead.
you're putting your finger on what I was trying to talk about earlier. There's spiritual warfare going on, and
Of course.
like those people that are using certain events to, you know, browbeat you or put you down, they don't even necessarily believe what they're saying. It's just that they have an ideological position and they're using any weapon that they can at their disposal to fight this ideological war.
1000%. In fact, would even go further than that and say that in a lot of these situations that I have encountered, I have actually watched people being possessed as if they're not
Yeah.
even themselves. You know, that something has just taken them over and is using the shell of their body and their consciousness to fight this war with me. Yeah. I'll even go out on a limb and say that, you know. So
Like a demon.
yeah, like a demon.
Sorry, go ahead. You were going to go out on a limb and say something else
Well,
there.
that what I just said, you know, that
Yeah.
you know, these phenomena have these sorts of patterns to that. But yet there is still a yearning that propels all of this. That yearning, whether it's the yearning for victory to vanquish your enemy, and then the question I've asked, you know, well, you vanquish an enemy, but what then? You know, what have you achieved? How have you attained to the object of your love? By vanquishing and completely demolishing your enemy. You know, I see this in a lot of these fascists online and these Trumpers online. All right, you know, you get rid of all the immigrants, you know, you get rid of all the leftists and the LGBTQ and all go down the list. Then what? You attain your white picket fenced utopia and keeping everything out and all the other are gone. Then what? Next thing is you will turn on each other if you aren't already. Because this is the thing, that emotion is self-propelling. It doesn't end at a certain thing. It keeps going and going and going and going. So we've seen this in the history of fascism, totalitarian movements. You know, they always at some point turn within, right? And go after each other after a while. It's just inevitable. It is so, predictable. This is why I think, looking at what is happening in the West today, and particularly the United States and the Five Eyes, this is basically the chickens coming home to roost. What has been projected outward to the world for so long is now being projected within itself. And even if it succeeds in doing what it claims that it wants to do, it will then finally turn on itself. I look at this whole indictment of these former Trump officials, these really right-wing neoconservative Republicans like John Bolton and the former FBI director, as hilarious. These people were to the right of Attila the Hun at one point, and now they're being indicted by Trump's Justice Department And they can't help themselves.
No. Yeah. No, it's actually kind of humorous.
Very.
But I admit talking about this is we're quite a bit of ways from the spirit of the text we're reading. So I mean, but you see what I mean? Like it is hard to wrap your head around the esoteric doctrine that we're studying in light of all the exoteric madness that we're living.
Yeah.
So that I guess that's not to repeat myself too much, but that's kind of where I was coming from. But
Yeah.
you've already given a very good explanation there. Sorry to interrupt, Riaz.
Oh no, it's okay. Listen, another thing I was thinking is that like a lot of these impetuses to change the world, you know, you've seen a lot over the past 60 years. You can take whichever Islamic revolution that you want to choose, like the Taliban or, you know, what happened in Iran. And there's something like sort of I kind of want to say it's sympathizable what they were trying to do. They conceptualized what they were doing as a fight against colonialism. And from my understanding, they had very good points in doing that. But then after a certain point, it's like this politics of like expediency begins to like take control. Maybe it's because of like a flagging of the will to really yearn towards the transcendent or what have you. And I guess one thing I was thinking is that like a lot of these names that were sort of, you know, they sort of say like, oh yeah, if you repeat these names and like they're good things. Like for instance, I've heard people say like, okay, you know, you can repeat the name Al-Kahar, and it's just like how do I know when in repeating this name I don't turn into like Netanyahu or something? He's really he's a compeller of a pretty high order. But how do I actually be like a sort of like good sort of compeller? And how do I sort of like weaponize these names? Not weaponize these names. How do I utilize these names for myself to control my nafs rather than to empower my nafs? This was something that I was.
That's part of the practice of the Saluk, you know, that is the lifetime you know, psychological deconditioning that you're engaging in every single day. Self-awareness, constant pushing the boundaries of that self-awareness is very key. Collectives don't like this. In fact, you can argue that systems are that one of the flaws with systems as we know it is to be less and less self-aware and to project any problems with the way a system works outward. Right? So the problem is not with the design of the system. The problem is what is kind of messing or pushing against the system. We see this in political situations constantly, you know. So, you know, I mean, my experience of Iran and the Islamic Revolution there, the intention was fine, you know, but, and this is what this current generation of supporters of Reza Pahlavi don't really get, is that at the time in the 1970s, to make Iran, to decolonialize Iran, to democratize Iran, to make Iran a more just, less classist society were all perfect motivations. But there were other motivations that intruded in this process, using the genuine need of a people to subvert it. Right? And this is where you got to be very careful in these sorts of situations, whether just as you're careful with yourself in a psychological decontamination, right? That's an inner revolution that is going on. You also have to be very careful in a collective revolution out there in the exoteric world, right? Never concentrate power in a few people, let alone, you know, elevate one particular man as the embodiment of all divinity and knowledge and what have you, as people did with Ayatollah Khomeini. Never do that. That doesn't mean that we emulate, you know, some of the flawed processes that we see in the West today. But I think by and large, a collective approach, a grassroots approach, a humble approach to revolutionary change itself is what is called for, to have your feet on the ground at all times. Right? And to be aware of every step of the process deliberately in what you're doing, to arrest excesses when they rear their ugly head. This is something that the Iranian revolutionaries didn't do. Once they got rid of the old system, they became it. And that is a trap that you've got to be aware of. And this also goes for your own psychological deconditioning. is that for every negative trait in yourself that you see, you got to be very deliberate in removing it. Because if you do it in a certain way, then that accentuates that trait. It becomes like almost like a demon that then takes you over. So you got to be, it's a very delicate dialectical dance.
Right, especially if it's happening concurrently with you developing actual good traits in yourself. You may not realize that you're actually giving your bad traits more ammunition, armaments to work
And
with.
maybe the process is not to even see them as bad traits. This is where alchemy, I think, is such an important tradition. Because what alchemy is saying is that you're not going, these are not bad traits. These are just traits that you need to transform, transmute. Like in a chemical process.
I guess the challenge then is, so for instance, you could take like a sort of, I guess any sort of like strong desire, like lust or gluttony. And I guess the challenge there would be like, how do you sort of like, I don't want to say weaponize that, but how do you sort of bring that into service of your higher order things instead of them having their toxic sort of indulgences?
From the Indian tantric system, lust and gluttony, perfect example. Lust is the locus of lust, the beginning of lust is at the root chakra itself, the Muladhara, right? But that is the fuel that propels the serpent power itself to then rise through the other 6 subtle centers to the crown, right? So the cultivation of the root chakra has to follow a trajectory that is seeking to then raise that. So once you raise the first level of the root chakra, then the second level is at the level of the gut. So the olfactory, all of that, that is where the drive for gluttony, all of that comes from. So then what is the next step? Is to raise then again the chakra to the level of the heart, from the gut to the heart. This comes with practice, both physical and mental, simultaneously. And this is one of the reasons why, at least in the traditional schools of yoga, the mantra work while the postures of the asanas were being performed was quite important. And it wasn't about gymnastics merely. It was about opening the subtle centers, right? It's about pushing this energy at the base up through the various parts of the body into the heart, and then the throat and third eye, and then finally the crown, if you can make it up there. That's what this is all about. And while you were doing so, you are in these postures with the mantras that you are reciting. There's also a psychological process happening in where you are slowly unwinding things and letting both the mantra, the postures, and your own psychological examination of this during that process do as alchemy to push these energies and align these energies, etc. Kundalini yoga is a very, very good system. And in my opinion, it's one that is amenable to being Sufified very fast. So you can take the mantras and put dhikr to it, take the visualizations of the lotuses and put all kinds of Islamic imagery to it. It's fine. Do it.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else? No?
I have a
Okay.
question.
Go for it.
What's the secret of destiny?
The secret that Sir al-Qadar is the mystery of time itself. I get into this actually at one point during this translation that I did. That is the moment of the secret of destiny, the secret of time, mystery of time is the reality of theophany itself to the Gnostic.
Why is it bad to disclose that?
Because most average people don't get it. They're
Okay.
thinking about time and
Oh, I
destiny
see.
from a
He's
chronological
being a
point of
little
view.
satirical here.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I
Yeah.
thought he was being like straight up,
Yeah.
don't tell people about destiny. And I was like, why not? You know, like, go see. Okay, I see. Thank you.
No worries. Okie dokie. If that's all she wrote for today, let's leave it here. for Suhrawardi. Next week, we're just going to talk about Avicenna's recital of Hey Ebne Akzon, the living son of the watchful. So you should have Avicenna and the visionary recital. I already uploaded that before. And the actual treatise starts at page 137. I won't read it, but we will come and discuss it. So if you want to highlight anything out of it, there's also a commentary attached by Corban in that same volume. So you can also read that if you wish. And then we will discuss this. The reason I'm doing this is that Ebne Akzon, the recital of the living son of the watchful, is the springboard to the final visionary recital in this book, which is the tale of the Occidental exile, which we will do in 2 weeks. And then once we finish that, then we will do a few weeks of the these waradat, these influxes, and then after we finish those, then we will start on the Hikmat al-Ishraq. So that we're now coming at Suhrawardi from 2 different esoteric modalities, which I think then help us digest these ideas of the Hikmat al-Ishraq a lot better, rather than just scholastic, philosophical, verbiage. We get into Suhrawardi's head through the esotericism, through the liturgies and the prayers, and these visionary recitals, and grasp the Hikmat al-Ishraq a lot better. I think this model of understanding Suhrawardi is a lot better than going through this peripatetic cycle of works, then ending at the Hikmat al-Ishraq, and then looking at these recitals and the prayers as sort of these, secondary appendages, which is what a lot of the contemporary scholarship has it. Anyway, let's leave that here for today. For those of you coming to Ibn Arabi tomorrow, I'll see you there tomorrow, where we will read the final chapter of Qaysari and the prologue of Ibn Arabi's Fusus al-Hikam. And then, the weeks following that, we will actually be reading out of the Fusus al-Hikam itself. Anyway, until tomorrow, for those of you coming, Yahat, for those of you not coming, we'll see you next week. Yahat.